Get ready, because today's story is the ultimate satisfaction. Reborn after being worked to death in his past life, a man gets a second chance at 10 years old to choose between his toxic mother or a massive 200 million inheritance. Choosing the wealth, he builds a towering empire, leaving his enemies to beg at his feet. Before we jump into this ruthless tale of sweet revenge and absolute power, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's get straight into the story. When I was 10 years old, my father passed away unexpectedly. Following his death, his lawyer asked whether I wanted to stay with my biological mother or take the 200 million yuan my father left behind. In my previous life, I cried and begged to stay with my mother. As a result, she took my father's compensation money, turned around, and married Uncle Zhao, the man next door. I became an unwanted burden in their eyes and was ultimately worked to death on a construction site, passing away at the young age of 28. Looking back at that pathetic, laughable life, I realized I had been completely foolish. Now, the crossroads of destiny appeared once again, and the woman before me was weeping bitterly. She cried out in heartbreak, her body so weak she would have collapsed if others hadn't been holding her up. In my previous life, I was completely fooled by her performance. Believing she was genuinely heartbroken and could not live without me, I rushed forward, threw my arms around her legs, and cried to stay with her. Instead, she took the money my father paid for with his life and joyfully married Zhao Chang, the man she claimed had just been looking after us, in less than 3 months. Before my father's ashes were even cold, that man moved into our house and slept in my father's bed. I became an eyesore and an unwanted tagalong. Zhao Chang had a son 2 years older than me who treated me like a thorn in his side. To please her new stepson, Li Lan beat and verbally abused me without mercy. The money my father left behind became the funding for their family's entertainment, luxury, and the stepbrothers showing off, while I had to scavenge for scrap metal just to afford my tuition. I was kicked out to work before finishing high school under the guise that boys need to become independent early. I hauled bricks on construction sites for 10 long years until I finally collapsed from exhaustion onto a pile of scalding steel bars, never to wake up again. Now I'm back. Li Lan rubbed her face against mine, telling me not to be afraid and that she would take good care of me. Her tears and snot smeared across my face, but deep in her eyes lay a hidden, desperate greed. Unlike my past life, I didn't cry. I simply watched her performance with cold detachment. My father's close friend and defense attorney, Uncle Zhou, walked over. He sighed, patted my shoulder, and pulled a document from his briefcase. He solemnly explained that my father, Ningguo, had anticipated everything and left a will concerning his 200 million yuan asset. Uncle Zhou presented 2 options. First, I could go with Li Lan, and she would manage the compensation and child support funds until I reached adulthood. Hearing this, Li Lan's breathing quickened, and her eyes flashed with terrifying greed as she stared at the document. The second option was that if I chose not to go with her, the money would be transferred to a trust fund under Uncle Zhou's supervision, giving me sole control while Li Lan received absolutely nothing. The air instantly froze, and every eye in the funeral hall focused on me, a 10-year-old child. Li Lan stiffened, staring at Uncle Zhou in disbelief. She immediately shifted back to an expression of utter grief, wrapping me in a suffocating embrace. She cried out, asking how Uncle Zhou could suggest such a thing and claiming that I was her absolute life. Yet, as she wailed, she violently pinched my arm and fiercely whispered in my ear, threatening to beat me to death if I dared say the wrong thing, claiming my money was her money. In my previous life, those words made me tremble with fear, and I was moved by her claim that she couldn't live without me. Now, it only made me feel completely disgusted. I could feel her hands shaking, not from sadness, but from the sheer excitement of imagining a life of luxury with Zhao Chang. I slowly broke free from her suffocating embrace, looked up at Uncle Zhou's stunned face, and spoke clearly, 1 word at a time. Uncle Zhou, I choose the second option. I want the 200 million. The entire funeral hall fell into absolute silence. The grief on Li Lan's face instantly shattered, turning into a hideous expression of disbelief. She screamed, her piercing voice cutting through the room. I calmly repeated myself, my words hitting like nails. I said I don't want you. I want the money. Li Lan lost all control, lunging at me like a madwoman to slap me across the face. However, her wrist was caught by Uncle Zhou, who sternly told her to calm down in front of Ning Ji's funeral arrangement, emphasizing that this was my choice. Li Lan wildly claimed that Uncle Zhou must have brainwashed me, but he disgusted threw her hand away. He reiterated that this was Ning Ji's legally binding will, and since I made my choice, he would initiate the legal procedures immediately, revoking her status as my legal guardian. Li Lan stood frozen, looking at me with venomous resentment, as if staring at a sworn enemy. She couldn't understand how her usually submissive son had suddenly become so cold and distant. Ignoring her entirely, I tugged at Uncle Zhou's sleeve and asked if my father had known all along. Uncle Zhou trembled slightly, knelt down to look into my eyes, and finally nodded with deep sorrow, noting that my father was a smart man who loved me deeply. His words made my eyes burn with tears. My father was indeed a brilliant man. He had long seen through Li Lan's unfaithfulness but chose to endure it just to give me a complete family. Only when he discovered he was terminally illness did he pave this escape route for me. In my previous life, I was too stupid and personally destroyed my father's final act of love. This time, I wouldn't make the same mistake. I chose the 200 million. Li Lan was eventually dragged away by relatives, leaving behind a venomous glare that I would remember for the rest of my life. But I didn't care. From the second I made my choice, our bond as mother and son was severed, leaving nothing but hatred. Uncle Zhou became my new legal guardian. After handling my father's funeral, this honest and reliable man took me into his home and showed me a long, detailed investment portfolio. These projects were what my father and Uncle Zhou had researched before his passing. However, I skipped directly to the final page. Seeing how slowly things were moving, I tapped my finger on the document, pointing directly at a few obscure, unremarkable names. I instructed Uncle Zhou to invest all the money into those specific companies. He frowned, deeply confused, and questioned what kind of unknown businesses Tencent and Alibaba were, reminding me that investing was no joke. I asked him if he trusted my father. He paused for a moment and nodded, saying that of course he did. I told him to trust me this time as well, using the clumsy excuse that my father had given me this advice in a dream. Though it was a weak cover, Uncle Zhou looked into my eyes, which were far too calm and steady for a 10-year-old child, and unexpectedly nodded in agreement. What he didn't know was that the companies I pointed out would shake the entire world over the next decade, growing into massive commercial giants while I remained their most mysterious, hidden shareholder. With those arrangements made, I relaxed completely and set a brand new life goal for myself: to lie flat and live a life of pure leisure. In my previous life, I had worked myself to death. In this life, I was going to live comfortably. I had Uncle Zhou find me the best private school, not to study hard, but simply because the environment was excellent and the cafeteria food was delicious. I began working out, not for any competitive reason, but simply to build a fit physique so clothes would look good on me. I also started studying the 8 major cuisines of Chinese cooking and learned to brew my own wine, purely to satisfy my own culinary cravings. I dumped all the tedious business matters onto Uncle Zhou, and later, onto a professional team he helped me assemble. The team was led by a man named Lao Wu, a Wall Street elite whom I headhunted by offering 3 times his previous salary. I had only one rule for him: do not disturb me. He was to handle everything himself, and if something couldn't be resolved, he could just let that specific venture go bankrupt. At the time, Lao Wu looked at me as if I were the foolish, spendthrift son of a wealthy landlord, but he still executed my orders faithfully. Consequently, my life became a routine of updates from Lao Wu. He would report that Tencent's stock price had tripled again, earning us 5 billion, to which I would reply that I understood and ask him not to interrupt my culinary research on complex dishes. Then he would report that Alibaba was about to go public, with our original shares expected to surpass 100 billion in value, and I would simply ask him to check on the quality of my latest batch of rice wine. Even when he reported that a random piece of land I had bought on a whim was now designated by the government as the central business district for a new zone, I remained indifferent. Lao Wu gradually grew accustomed to my hands-off, relaxed state, eventually filtering out insignificant billion-dollar deals on his own while I pushed further into my leisurely lifestyle. The wealth under my name snowballed crazily, but I became numb to the numbers, caring only about my personal comfort. I became a mythical legend within the top billionaire circles. No one knew my identity, only that a mysterious Mr. Ning existed, a man wealthy enough to rival nations yet completely elusive. This continued until I turned 18, when a woman suddenly appeared. For years, the old childhood marriage alliance had been forgotten, and no one expected that the inheritance my father left behind would grow into a massive commercial empire a decade later. Although I deliberately maintained a low profile, the resurgence of the Ning family line still caught the attention of the Xiao family. On my 18th birthday, the old master of the Xiao family personally came to our door with his beloved granddaughter, claiming they were there to fulfill the old betrothal. I met Xiao Wanqing for the first time in Uncle Zhou's living room. She wore a well-tailored white skirt suit, her long hair pinned immaculately behind her head, and her face adorned with elegant, subtle makeup. She was undeniably beautiful, but she was like an iceberg, radiating a cold aura that kept everyone at a distance. She was the textbook definition of a powerful career woman, raised as a family successor, rational, formidable, and calm. It was said she secured a double doctorate by age 20 and took over her family business at 22, employing ruthless tactics that kept even the veteran business executives on their guard. Her world revolved entirely around her career, interests, and data, viewing emotions as a useless weakness. "You must be Ning Yi," she said, sitting across from me with her legs crossed. Her gaze swept over me like a scanner, filled with undisguised scrutiny and slight disdain. I had just returned from a workout, wearing loose sportswear with my hair still damp from sweat. I offered a lazy response, leaning back against the sofa as I picked up an apple and took a bite. My casual attitude clearly displeased her, causing her brow to furrow. She noted that she heard I had only graduated high school, her lips curling into a mocking sneer as she concluded that I was nothing more than an idle, useless playboy. I shrugged dismissively, telling her she could look at it that way. She let out a cold laugh, the contempt in her eyes deepening. "Ning, let's speak frankly. This marriage arrangement was just a joke made by our grandfathers. It cannot be taken seriously. The man who marries me, Xiao Wanqing, must be a powerful figure capable of standing beside me, not a useless failure who only knows how to eat, drink, and play." I looked at her with amusement, asking her what she proposed. "Therefore, I want you to proactively speak to my grandfather and call off this engagement," she commanded in an authoritative tone. "As compensation, I can give you a large sum of money, or I can arrange a stress-free, easy position for you within our company." I almost spat out the apple in my mouth. Give me money? Arrange a position for me? Did she have any idea that her pride and joy, the Xiao Group, did not even amount to a fraction of the loose change in my assets? Looking at her arrogant stance, I suddenly found the situation highly entertaining. In my previous life, I lacked the status to even catch a glimpse of her. In this life, she sat right in front of me, offering compensation in a patronizing tone. I wiped my mouth and smiled, readily agreeing. Xiao Wanqing blinked, seemingly caught off guard by my quick compliance, and asked what kind of compensation I wanted while resuming her icy expression. I told her I wanted neither money nor a position. Standing up, I walked over, leaned down toward her ear, and spoke in a low voice meant only for the two of us. I told her that I wanted her to personally inform her grandfather that she was the one who wasn't good enough for me, Ning Yi. Xiao Wanqing's pupils dilated in shock. She had likely never heard such audacious words in her life. She pushed me away and stood up abruptly, her face flushing with anger as she snapped at me for being ungrateful. I sat back down on the sofa, crossed my legs, and calmly pointed out that she was the one who had looked down on me first. Standing tall over me, she demanded to know what someone like me was capable of besides being born into the right family, accusing me of living like a parasite who did nothing but wait around to die. I simply held up my hands and replied that the difference was I chose to live this way because it pleased me. I added that I ruled my own life, unlike certain people who lived like precision machinery, calculating gains and losses even for their own emotions. My words clearly struck a nerve. Her face turned pale, and she clenched her fists. She stated that since our paths were completely different, we had nothing more to say to each other. She promised to have the engagement dissolved, declaring that we would have no further association, before turning on her heel to leave like a proud white swan refusing to admit defeat. Uncle Zhou stepped out from the study with a worried expression, asking if I had been too impulsive since the Shao family held considerable influence in the capital. I assured him not to worry, noting that she was the one who wanted to call off the wedding, not me. Besides, a person who couldn't even control her own marriage wouldn't amount to much anyway. I watched the direction Shao Wanqing had disappeared without a hint of emotion in my eyes. In my past life, she was like the distant moon in the sky, far beyond my reach. In this life, she was merely a pitiful individual trapped by her own family. I looked forward to seeing what kind of shattered expression she would have in the future. It was bound to be highly amusing. The engagement drama settled quickly. True to her word, the Shao family formally announced the cancellation of the betrothal a few days later. Pleased to have my peace back, I returned to my leisurely lifestyle. Lao Wu continued to call me right on time every day, reporting how many hundreds of millions we had pulled in. My personal net worth swelled to a terrifying figure I couldn't even be bothered to calculate. Yet I still wore cheap sportswear, drove an ordinary car, and spent my days moving between the gym and the local food market. This routine continued until one day, in a struggling dessert shop hidden deep in the old town alleyways, I encountered an angel. It was a small, antique-style shop located deep in an old residential district, selling traditional Chinese desserts that were on the verge of disappearing. I was drawn in by a handwritten wooden sign at the entrance that read, "Today's special, osmanthus sugar steamed chestnut flour cake." This particular dessert happened to be my father's favorite thing to make for me when I was a child. I pushed the door open, causing the wind chimes to chime softly, and a girl wearing a pale green qipao emerged from the back. She had waist-length hair, wore no makeup, and possessed a serene presence that instantly brought a sense of peace to anyone looking at her. I asked if there was any chestnut flour cake left, my voice sounding unexpectedly dry. The girl paused before offering a warm, gentle smile that felt like a spring breeze. She politely asked me to take a seat and went to fetch the dish. Her voice was incredibly pleasant, soft and sweet. I took a seat by the window, and she soon returned with a delicate plate of pastries. The chestnut flour cakes were shaped like tiny plum blossoms, drizzled with glistening osmanthus sugar and releasing an incredibly enticing aroma. I took a bite and found the taste identical to what my father used to make. A wave of warmth surged from the depths of my heart, and my eyes grew slightly moist. Sitting across from me with her chin resting in her hands, the girl eagerly asked if it tasted good. I praised it sincerely, mentioning it tasted exactly like my father's cooking. Her eyes lit up, and she shared that the recipe had been passed down from her grandmother, who always lamented that very few people knew how to make it anymore. "Your grandmother must have been an incredible person," I remarked. She proudly puffed out her small chest and replied, "Of course she was. My name is Xin Yuchu, and I run this shop. What about you?" I introduced myself as Ning Yi. From that moment, we began talking as easily as if we were old friends who had known each other for a long time. I soon learned that her family boasted a rich culinary heritage, with ancestors who had served as imperial chefs. Growing up, she had been deeply immersed in these traditional crafts. Disliking the rigid 9-to-5 routine of large corporations, she chose to open this small shop with the sole desire of passing down these beautiful, disappearing flavors. Her values matched mine perfectly. We both favored a slow-paced lifestyle and shared a near-stubborn passion for traditional culture. That afternoon, I sat in her tiny dessert shop for hours, talking about everything under the sun. The sunlight filtered through the window frame, casting a golden glow over her. Watching her bright eyes light up as she spoke and catching her occasional endearing smiles, I felt a void deep inside me get filled. It suddenly dawned on me that my cold, hardened heart, withered by the trauma of rebirth, was beginning to soften once again. From that day forward, Xin Yuchu's dessert shop became my daily anchor. I visited every single day without fail. Sometimes I went to try a new sweet creation, other times to enjoy a cup of tea she personally brewed, but most of the time, I simply sat there watching her work. She was always busy, being the sole person running the place. From prepping ingredients and crafting desserts to serving customers and cleaning up, she did everything herself. Yet, she never complained, always maintaining a deeply content smile. I eventually started helping her out. It began with washing dishes, progressed to prepping vegetables, and later, she even allowed me into her back kitchen to watch her assemble the pastries. Her kitchen wasn't large, but it was meticulously organized, with every utensil neatly arranged. When she worked, her focus was absolute, resembling a devout artist. Watching her slender hands transform ordinary ingredients into exquisite works of art was pure enjoyment. On one occasion, I was helping her carry a heavy sack of flour. Having just returned from the gym, I was wearing only a tight athletic tank top. Shen Yuchu stood behind me, watching my muscles tense from the strain, her cheeks flushing a light pink as she complimented my physique. I set the sack down, turned around, and playfully puffed out my chest, asking her if she wanted to feel it. I expected her to blush and run away, but to my surprise, she actually reached out. Her fingertips were cool, carrying a faint, sweet aroma of glutinous rice, as she gently poked the definition of my abs. "Wow, it's so hard," she exclaimed, her eyes widening in pure amazement. My entire body stiffened instantly, and a sudden rush of heat surged straight to my head. Having lived 2 lifetimes, this was the very first time I had ever been teased by a girl. Looking at her innocent, curious expression, I was caught between amusement and embarrassment. I caught her playful little hand, which felt incredibly soft, and leaned down to whisper in her ear. Her face immediately turned completely red, looking like a ripe apple as she swiftly pulled her hand back and bolted out of the kitchen. Watching her frantic retreat, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. She was simply too adorable. Our relationship warmed steadily through these daily interactions. We had an endless stream of shared interests, ranging from fine food and wine brewing to traditional kunku opera and the guqin. I discovered she was a literal treasure trove, constantly surprising me. She could play the guzheng, paint traditional ink wash landscapes, and even craft her own cosmetic rouge. She seemed like a classic lady who had stepped right out of an ancient era, radiating an elegant, timeless charm. Being with her made the entire world feel slower, peaceful, and beautifully still. My heart, which had previously wanted nothing more than to lie flat in isolation, began to stir. I found myself looking forward to seeing her every day, anticipating her smile, our playful bickering, and her unconscious little gestures. I even began to imagine spending the rest of my days alongside her. She would playfully tease me for idling around all day just to collect rent at her shop and hoard her best desserts. But I knew the only thing keeping us apart was an unconfessed truth. The moment that broke that barrier arrived entirely by accident. One day, a wealthy second-generation heir driving a luxury sports car swaggered into the shop and immediately set his sights on Shin Yuchu. Powder-faced and speaking with slick, flippant arrogance, he demanded to rent out the entire shop so she could keep him company. When Shin Yuchu firmly refused, the heir lost his temper and began throwing a tantrum, smashing several items in the store. Hearing the commotion from the back kitchen, I rushed out to find a scene of total disarray and Shin Yuchu's face pale with fright. An instant, unnameable fury flared up inside me. I had never been this angry across both of my lifetimes. Stepping directly in front of Shin Yuchu, I glared coldly at the heir and ordered him to get out. The heir pointed arrogantly at my face, demanding to know who I thought I was to interfere in his business. Without uttering a single word, I pulled out my phone and called Lao Wu. I gave him the sports car's license plate number and told him to ensure this man and his family's company completely vanished from the capital within 5 minutes. The heir paused, then erupted into mocking laughter, taunting me for acting like I was in a movie and asking if I even knew who his father was. I stared at him silently, as if looking at a dead man. In less than 3 minutes, the heir's phone rang. He answered it, and the arrogant smirk on his face shattered instantly. He panicked, shouting into the receiver, unable to believe that their corporate accounts had been frozen and all partnership contracts cancelled. He frantically demanded to know who they had offended, his voice trembling with sheer terror. Finally, he collapsed heavily to his knees, dropping his phone onto the floor. He looked up at me with wide, trembling eyes, staring at me as if I were a monster, his lips quivering without a single word coming out. "Can you get lost now?" I said coldly. He scrambled to his feet and fled the shop in a panic, leaving even his flashy sports car behind. Silence returned to the store. Shen Yuchu stared at me, her beautiful eyes filled with shock and a hint of admiration. I turned around to face her, gently wiping the tear stains from her face with deep affection. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Before she could react, I leaned down and pressed my lips against her cool ones. Her lips were just as soft as I had imagined, carrying the subtle sweetness of osmanthus sugar. She stiffened at first like a startled fawn, but gradually relaxed and responded awkwardly. The kiss was light and brief, yet it felt like an electric current striking my heart. After a long moment, I reluctantly let her go. She kept her head down, her face blushing so intensely it looked as if it could bleed, not daring to look at me. "Shen Yuchu," I murmured, cupping her face so she had to look into my eyes, and spoke with absolute sincerity. "Will you be my girlfriend?" She bit her lip, her long eyelashes fluttering like butterfly wings. After a long silence, she finally let out a soft, barely audible hum of agreement. I smiled like an absolute fool, pulling her tightly into my embrace and feeling as though I held the entire world. Across 2 lifetimes, this was the very first time I had ever experienced true infatuation and happiness. Muffled against my chest, she whispered, "You were so scary just now." I realized I had truly frightened her. With just one phone call, you made an entire company go bankrupt. Ning Yi, who exactly are you? Looking into her clear, innocent eyes, I knew I couldn't keep her in the dark anymore. "I told you before, I'm just an idle, wealthy landlord," I replied, gently pinching her nose. "I just happen to own a lot of property." I shared a selective version of my story, keeping the secret of my rebirth to myself. I simply explained that my father had left me a massive inheritance, and I had used that capital to make a few investments that turned a decent profit. Shen Yuchu blinked in disbelief. "A decent profit? Is that what you call making a company go bankrupt in 5 minutes?" Thinking it over, I framed it in a way she could easily grasp. "Well, it means I could probably buy tens of thousands of dessert shops just like yours." Shin Yuchu gasped sharply. She spent a long moment counting on her fingers before looking up at me in utter shock. "You're a billionaire?" I nodded, and she fell silent. My heart grew anxious, fearing she might back away due to the immense wealth gap between us. To my surprise, after a prolonged silence, she suddenly raised her head and looked at me with a perfectly serious expression. "Listen carefully, Ningyi." "I'm listening." "From now on, your money is my money. And my money is still my money." I froze for a second, then burst into roaring laughter. I picked her up and spun her around in circles right where we stood. "All right, everything will be done your way, my chief financial officer." Dizzy from the spinning, she could only wrap her arms around my neck and let out a bell-like laugh. I knew I hadn't chosen the wrong person. I was committed to Shin Yuchu for who she was, completely independent of any wealthy status or material glamour. After officially being with her, my leisurely life became incredibly vibrant. We researched new desserts and brewed new wine together. She would drag me along to stroll through the early morning food markets, arguing with vendors until her face turned red just to save a single dime. She loved the food we made, and she loved feeling my abs, playfully claiming they felt like a washboard. I loved kissing her neck just to watch her cheeks flush from the sensation. We were completely wrapped up in each other, acting like any other deeply infatuated couple. Lao Wu frequently complained about being utterly suffocated by our public displays of affection. "Boss, this is the acquisition contract for the Huangyu Group, it needs your signature." "Just leave it there. I need to make some rock sugar stewed pears for Yuchu first." "Boss, here is an invitation to a European royal banquet." "Decline it." I'm taking Yuchu to see a newly released movie. Boss, President Xiao of the Xiao Group wants to schedule a meeting with you to discuss a potential partnership. Lao Wu stole a cautious glance at me as he brought up her name. My hand paused midair. I hadn't heard the name Xiao Wanqing in a very long time. I asked indifferently, what does she want from me? Lao Wu explained that the Xiao Group had recently hit a massive cash flow crisis and urgently required a significant investment. They discovered our firm, Smooth Sailing, and wanted to seek a partnership. Smooth Sailing was merely a small investment firm I had instructed Lao Wu to establish, the most insignificant corner of my vast commercial empire. Yet, even this minor corner was a towering giant that the Xiao Group had to look up to. How the tables had turned. The icy, arrogant CEO who had once stood high above me, claiming I wasn't good enough for her, was now practically begging for my investment. A playful smirk crossed my lips. I told Lao Wu that if she wanted to negotiate, she could bring her proposal directly to my dessert shop. Lao Wu was completely bewildered, wondering why she had to come to Shin Yochu's place. I instructed him to have her bring her plans so I could gauge her sincerity. I wanted to see exactly what kind of expression would cross Xiao Wanqing's face when she saw me with Shin Yuchu, when she realized the useless failure she once despised had become a towering entity she desperately had to look up to. I found myself looking forward to it more and more. When Xiao Wanqing arrived, I was in the back kitchen making crab roe soup dumplings, which were Shin Yochu's absolute favorite. I wore a white chef's uniform and an apron, my hands still dusted with flour. Shen Yuchu clung to my waist from behind like a little cat, her chin resting gently on my shoulder. She happily supervised my work while sneaking bites of the freshly steamed crab roe, playfully criticizing my dumpling pleating technique, teasing me that the soup was about to leak, and calling me a dummy. She declared that the batch was barely passable and officially approved by the chief financial officer. I let her fool around as she pleased, occasionally turning my head to plant a gentle kiss on her cheek. The kitchen was filled with the rich aroma of fresh food and the sweet ambience between us. It was precisely at this moment that Xiao Wanqing pushed the door open and walked in. She was dressed in a sharp black business suit, her hair immaculately pinned back as usual. Her face bore deep traces of exhaustion and anxiety, yet she still fought to maintain her imposing ICCO facade. However, the moment she took in the scene before her, she froze completely. She could never have dreamed that the mysterious, all-powerful boss behind Smooth Sailing, the man whose influence reached the skies, was the exact same failure she had looked down upon. Even more beyond her imagination was the fact that this supposed failure was currently tied to an apron in a tiny dessert shop kitchen, personally cooking for a girl who was intimately embracing him in a clear display of ownership. Xiao Wanqing's face turned instantly pale. Her usually cold, rational eyes filled with absolute shock, confusion, and a wave of panic she hadn't even consciously realized. "President Xiao, you've arrived," I called out casually, acting as though I had only just noticed her presence. I wiped my hands, unknotted my apron, and greeted her with total indifference. Shen Yuchu poked her small head out from behind my back, eyeing Xiao Wanqing curiously before whispering to me, asking who she was and noting that she looked incredibly fierce. I smiled, gently pinching her nose as I replied, "Just someone here begging for food." Shen Yuchu couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. Xiao Wanqing's face instantly shifted from pale to green, and then from green to a furious red, a truly spectacular display. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug deep into her palms. Grating out the words through her teeth, she told me not to go too far. Too far? I raised an eyebrow. "President Xiao, if I recall correctly, you were the one who explicitly stated that we should have nothing to do with each other. Now that you've proactively come to my door, if you aren't here begging, what exactly are you doing?" I took Shin Yochu's hand, walked out to a table in the front shop, and set a steaming basket of soup dumplings right in front of her, encouraging her to try them while they were fresh. Only then did I lazily look up at Xiao Wanqing, making a casual gesture toward an empty seat. "Sit down, President Xiao. If you have something to say, speak." My tone was entirely dismissive, as if I were dealing with an absolute nobody. This was completely different from the intense, sharp-tongued corporate negotiation she had prepared for. There was no fierce battle of words here, only a brutal, absolute crushing of her pride. Xiao Wanqing took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and retrieved a thick binder of documents from her bag. Mr. Ning, this is the Xiao Group's 5-year development blueprint, along with our current financing proposal. I hope. Stop. I raised a hand, cutting her off cleanly. President Xiao, you seem to have confused something. What? Right now, you are the one begging me, not the other way around, I said, leaning back comfortably in my chair and speaking with deliberate slowness. I have zero interest in your plans. I only want to ask you one question. I pointed to Shin Yuchu beside me, and then to myself. Do you think she and I make a good match? Xiao Wanqing's body guessed violently. She looked at me, then looked at Shin Yuchu, who was happily taking tiny bites of her soup dumpling with an expression of pure bliss. Xiao Wanqing's lips parted, but she couldn't summon a single word. Did we match? The question pierced through her arrogant heart like a razor-sharp blade. The man before her was handsome, exceedingly wealthy, and possessed overwhelming power, yet he was entirely willing to cook by hand for an ordinary girl, looking at her with a profound, gentle affection Xiao Wanqing had never witnessed in her life. Meanwhile, the girl beside him, though dressed simply, had a completely clean smile and clear eyes, radiating a serene happiness from being deeply cherished. Sitting together, they looked like a perfect, peaceful portrait of a beautiful life. And what about herself? Dressed in an incredibly expensive designer suit, clutching a thick stack of corporate proposals, she sat there like a total clown, practically begging for a shred of this man's attention. Once upon a time, she had been the one standing over him, using a patronizing tone to tell him to get out of her world. Now, the tables had turned completely. A massive wave of irony and deep regret flooded over her, shattering her pride and rationality into absolute dust. She struggled to speak, her voice sounding hoarse and unrecognizable as she whispered a faint, yes. I let out a soft laugh. Is that so? But I distinctly remember someone calling me a useless failure and a parasite who wasn't good enough for her. The last trace of color drained completely from Xiao Wanqing's face. She knew I was humiliating her, using her own past words and throwing them right back in her face. Ning Yi. I admit I was completely blind back then, she said, closing her eyes tightly as if exhausting every ounce of her strength. I apologize to you. But business is business, and personal matters are personal. This partnership is genuinely crucial to the survival of the Xiao Group. I beg you. Beg me? I interrupted her coldly. President Xiao, in what capacity are you begging me? As my former fiancé, or as a defeated opponent? Shin Yuchu listened to the exchange with absolute confusion, but she was incredibly smart and didn't interrupt. Instead, she silently placed another soup dumpling into my bowl, offering her silent, unwavering support through her clear eyes. That simple, quiet gesture caused Xiao Wanqing's remaining emotional defenses to crumble entirely. She saw the unspoken understanding and deep-rooted intimacy between us, something she could never hope to obtain. She had always believed her sole pursuit was the absolute pinnacle of her career and supreme corporate power. Yet, standing at the top and looking down, she finally realized how empty and cold her inner world truly was. She had won her career, but she had thrown away the only person who could have ever truly warmed her life. Ningyi, she spoke again, her voice cracking with a distinct sob. Please, I am begging you, okay? She was crying. The eternally proud, ice-cold Xiao Wanqing was actually weeping openly, her tears tracing paths down her immaculate cheeks and dripping onto the documents she held. The teardrops blurred the words on the page, spreading across the sheet. I watched her quietly, feeling no satisfaction, only absolute indifference. In my previous life, her tears might have softened my heart, but not anymore. I picked up the proposal binder, and without even glancing at it, tossed it directly into the nearby trash can. President Xiao, I stood up and looked down at her. Let me also tell you that I have no interest in acquiring a company on the brink of bankruptcy. especially when the owner of that company is you. Without another look, I took Shin Yochu's hand, turned around, and walked back into the kitchen. Behind us, the sound of her weeping slowly faded. Xiao Wanqing left, utterly devastated. I didn't pay any attention to what happened to her next because an even more disgusting person showed up at our door. Li Lan, my biological mother. I had no idea where she had heard about Shin Yochu's dessert shop, but she blocked the entrance. Having not seen her for 10 years, she looked much older and heavily haggard. The once glamorous woman now had corners of her eyes crawling with wrinkles, gray hair streaking through her locks, and cheap street market clothes hanging off her. Her face carried an air of cheap opportunism and calculation. One look was enough to tell that she and Zhao Chong had not been living well over these years. In my previous life, they took my dad's money and squandered it without limit. Zhao Chong also picked up a gambling addiction, quickly destroying the family savings. In this life, without my dad's money, their lives were clearly much harder. The moment she saw me, she lunged forward, trying to hug me just like she used to 10 years ago. Disgusted, I stepped aside to dodge her. "Ning, my son. Mom finally found you." She began her usual theatrical display of weeping and wailing. "If you have something to say, say it," I said coldly. "If not, stop crying." "Ning Yi, how can you speak to your mother like that? Mom knows you still blame me, but back then, I had my own difficulties. Your Uncle Zhao and I have suffered so much these past few years. He was scammed in business, ended up neck-deep in debt, and now we can't even afford food. Ning, you're successful now. You can't just ignore your mother." She wiped her tears while playing the victim, dropping to her knees as she spoke. I frowned. Shen Yuchu walked out from the shop and looked at the scene, completely at a loss. "Is she?" "Just a nobody," I said, shielding Shen Yuchu behind my back, refusing to let her be tainted by such a filthy spectacle. Li Lan shrieked, pointing a finger at Shen Yuchu. "How am I a nobody? I'm his mother. His biological mother. Who do you think you are? Some seductress trying to hook my son and steal our family's money, is that it?" Shen Yochu's face turned pale. My expression darkened completely. Word by word, my voice dropped to an icy chill. "I'll say it one last time. Get out. I'm not leaving. Ning Yi, you have to give me money today. 1 million, no 10 million. Otherwise, I'll stay right here and never leave. I'll even sue you. Sue you for abandoning your own biological mother." Li Lan began throwing a wild, shameless tantrum. She honestly thought I was still that soft target she could manipulate at will. She thought I cared about my reputation or the opinions of others. She was dead wrong. Looking at her hideous face, I suddenly smiled. I said, "You want to sue me? I'll give you the chance." I took out my phone and dialed Lao Wu again. "Lao Wu, contact the best legal team in the capital. Then, get in touch with the largest media outlets. I want to hold a press conference. The theme will be an accounting of the past 10 years between me and my biological mother." Li Lan froze. She never expected that instead of being threatened, I would actually blow the situation up. "You dare?" Her voice lacked real conviction. "Watch me," I retracted my phone with a cold laugh. "Li Lan, you probably forgot the choice I made 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I could reject you for money. 10 years later, I can just as easily ruin your reputation for my own peace. Since you love acting so much, I'll build you a much bigger stage to perform on." My gaze locked onto her as if looking at a corpse. Terrified by my stare, Li Lan felt her skin crawl and quickly fled. "All right. That's a wrap, my friend." Seeing Ning Yi protect his true love while leaving his toxic past completely in the dust is the ultimate reality check. Make sure to smash that like button and drop a comment from the heart on what you would do with 200 million. If you're really feeling the love, share this video with your crew. And yo, check out the channel. I've got tons of revenge and rebirth stories you're going to vibe with. Catch you in the next one.